Growing up, I've noticed that we are shaped by our surroundings, our family, our friends, the people who are close to us. They influence us and makes us to be the person that we are today. But sadly, most of the time, their influence makes us lose sense of our own self. Even something as simple as our music playlist might not fully be ours. Maybe it's something your best friend once played, something you saw on the internet, or something you saw online that you absorbed without noticing. And some of us are living inside of a playlist that isn't even ours to begin with. So, how can we correlate this with our own lives? Maybe it's the way you tone down your achievements so you won't look different from others, so you won't look like you're bragging. Maybe it's the way you pretend to struggle so your group accepts you. Or maybe, and this is something I also have a hard time dealing with, is when you pretend to struggle so other people won't think you're being different from them. These things might seem insignificant at first, it might seem tiny and small, and you know what? Nothing to be mind of, right? But if you add all of these tiny things together, day by day, you will start to lose sense of your own self, away from your true self, and closer towards your borrowed self. The borrowed self is the you that forms when you get stuck in the cycle of comparing yourself to other people frequently, time and time again. And you don't do this on purpose. Of course, you don't. You do it subconsciously because you don't even know you're doing it in the first place. You compare yourself, you conform to other people, you imitate what they do. These are the things that makes us to be our borrowed self and not our true self. And to understand how this borrowed self can form, we must go back to a research made by Leo Festinger titled The Social Comparison Theory. Now, what exactly is this? This theory explains how we tend to evaluate ourselves based on other people's expectations, their achievements, not by our own growth. Let's put it in this perspective. Have you ever really studied hard for a test? Like, let's say you pulled up an all-nighter, you watched YouTube videos, you asked your friends, and when the time comes to do the test, you just stare blankly at the paper. Because turns out, when you blank out, you cannot do anything. You feel stressed and you feel panicked. And I was there before. And so when the time is finally out, the bell rings, you just hopelessly submit your paper. But there is one hope that you cling onto. You run to your nearest friend and you ask them, "Hey, how do you think was the test?" Now, there are two types of answers your friends can give. The first one, "Oh no, I couldn't do that one either. What was this answer? I don't know." And then you just reply, "I don't know either. It was different from what the teacher have taught us." And you both panic, you both cry, you both spiral together. But somehow, you feel relieved. You feel relieved because even if you fail, at least you're not failing alone. Hey, at least that's your friend who's also failing with you. And then here comes answer number two. The one we don't want to hear, and I feel like you all know what it is when it turns out all your friends could do the test, your friend, your classmates, everyone from other classes, and you are the only one who couldn't do it. At this point, you will keep it to yourself, your failure, and you will think to yourself, what have I done wrong? What have I done differently? Why did they succeed and why did I not succeed? You start dismissing your own growth, the times you spent preparing for the test, pulling up all-nighters, talking to your friends, asking explanations from the teachers. You dismiss all of that because you have failed. And I actually went through a similar situation a few weeks back, but it was quite the other way around, I should say. During an accounting test, after I finished it, I felt pretty calm. I wasn't overconfident because I still didn't know my score, but I felt like I did pretty well. And so when I walk up to my group of friends and I lock eyes with one of them, I could see the panic in their eyes. They were stressing, they were crying because they were all convinced they have failed this accounting test. And being in that situation, one of my friends tapped me by my shoulder. Hey Giselle, how did you do on your test? And faced with that situation, what would you do? And so I did what I did. I toned myself down and I acted confused. I blended in with my friends and I told them, oh yeah, I couldn't do it either. It goes against what I actually felt, what I actually experienced, because I did not want them to think I was the only one that's different here. I didn't want to be the only one who's different from my group. And I try so hard so I wouldn't be left out. So I know what's going on. I was afraid. I made assumptions in my own head that my friends would hate me if it turns out I could do the test and the other people couldn't. But the thing is, these are all just assumptions. There are no way to prove if these assumptions are real or not. We don't even know. I don't even know. And I did not even realize that. I was just subjugated into the thought that all the people would hate me. A while back, I was researching something called the Ash conformity experiment. This is something I wanted to include in my own talk, and I researched very deeply on every analysis, every paper there is. This theory, this experiment, explains how people tend to set aside their own opinions and beliefs just to follow a certain group. That might sound familiar, right? Because that's exactly what I did during my accounting test. Very funny. I was the subject of the research I was researching on. So we might see that how easy it is for us to fall into the notion of being our borrowed self. How easy it is for us to conform, for us to compare ourselves. So now, the question is, how do we escape from it? We now know that we are stuck inside a cycle of this borrowed self. And the first non-negotiable thing you need to know is that you need to have self-awareness. You need to understand. And just like me, I only knew a few days later that I was conforming with my group. But that's good, because I now know that it was something that I did subconsciously. And the next time, I can be more self-aware and remind myself to not do that. The thing you need to have other than self-awareness is called authenticity. That is the way you can escape from your borrowed self. Now you might think, oh no, is this another talk about how to be different, how to be unique, how to be yourself, yada yada yada? Okay, let me stop you right there. Because what most talks miss on about in this authenticity notion is that if you don't even have access towards the you in yourself, what first step could be done? Let's say you've been living a life full of imitation and comparing yourself to other people. How do you know who you need to be if you spent your whole life being other people? How do you get out of it? So, I propose this. Instead of asking, how can I, emphasizing on the can, you start asking yourself, how do I? Because when you emphasize on the do, you get on the doing right away. Because doing has something that thinking does not. Real first-hand experience. And in this experience, this practice of being yourself, You might fall. You might end up back to where you were. And you might fall back to your habit of your borrowed self. Because when you are faced with a crowd, you are faced with someone you want to impress, you subconsciously go back to your original habits. But failing doesn't mean a step back. It doesn't mean regression. It means you are tough enough to go forward, to try again. And to build this thing, you need to have resilience, the art of determination, the courage of taking the first step, even when you have failed, even when you know that it's going to take a long time. You might not know what the end result is, but slowly, surely, you will get there by determination, by resilience. I promise you. And so by now, I hope that when you keep practicing the art of being yourself, you start to get the grasp, the skill, and you make it a habit. You make being yourself a habit. And that is what I call confidence, where you can always be yourself at will, whenever you want, wherever you want. What an amazing skill that is, right? You might ask me now, how do I get this? Skill must be something that you need to be practiced on over and over again. How do I actually practice this? How do I practice being confident? I just said it. Because we fall into the notion of our borrowed self by small little things of comparison, of instantly agreeing with someone, you have to fight it back by also doing small things that change you. For example, when you are in a group, don't just always agree with them. Say your own opinions and don't be afraid of what other people say. Even if it forces you to be different, just say a little bit of your own thoughts, little by little, and these tiny things can become significant. When you finally have the confidence to be like this, you have finally grasped your true self. You have finally let go of your borrowed self, and you know what it feels like. You have grasped the feeling of being yourself, and that is amazing. Because once you get a hold of what it feels like, you don't want to stop. The dopamine keeps rushing in, and you always want to speak out like how you want to speak out, not controlled by anyone else. And so, before I end, remember how at the beginning I talked about our life is made out of playlists, of imitation, of comparing ourselves to other people. The same thing applies here. Because if we live a life full of all those negative stuffs, it's like letting other people put their own songs in your playlist, in your own life. But if you've been listening, you know that if you have the courage or the determination to take the first step, that is the way you start rewriting your own playlist with your own voice. And that is such a powerful thing. And so before I end, I invite you all to be mindful of what you do, to be aware of what other people are doing and what you are about to do. Think before you act. And so, I invite you all to unlock your true self starting today. Thank you.